What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking the albums of Coheed and Cambria. Alright, let's dive right in with the second stage, Turbine Blade in 2002. Now, I want to start by saying that it actually took me a while to get into these guys back in the day. I found them to be kind of lame at first, but what helped it click for me was I had a friend who was like, dude, you're listening to these guys all wrong. Because I was sort of mixing them in with the metalcore stuff I was listening to, and he's like, no, this is basically like a modern sci-fi Rush. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, he's absolutely right. They do concept albums on kind of geeky topics with high-pitched vocals and super proggy songwriting and instrumentation, and that could absolutely double as a description of Rush. So if you're having trouble yourself, getting into this, then consider it in that framework, and it might shift your perspective. But getting into this specific album, I absolutely love it. I think it still holds up. It's not quite as grand in scale as the later stuff, but it's still packed with great moments. The intro really sets the stage for everything to come with that classic melody, and then those atmospheric and proggy riffs kick in on Time Consumer. Devil in Jersey City is a catchy, more rock-oriented track that always ends up in my playlist, definitely one I revisit a lot. Everything Evil, Delirium Trigger, Earshot Kid Disaster, Never Ender. So many great hooks with the dual guitars, and Claudio killing it on vocals. Every song is super anthemic and a lot of great sing and scream along moments here with some almost metalcore elements too, which is sort of what kind of drew me in at first, but fantastic album, and I'd be curious in the comments if this surprises people, but I'm going to go ahead and put this one up at S tier right off the bat. Then we have In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3 in 2003, and here is where I feel like Coheed are sort of really coming into their trademark sound at this point. It's much more overtly prog, and another one packed with classics. The title track is the first Coheed song I learned on guitar, and it's just such a fun one to play with lots of little movements and licks in it. And then Three Evils is also super fun to play or just bob your head to. Cuts Marked in the March of Men is a cool darker sounding song, along with The Crowing, which has another instantly recognizable riff on it. A Favor in the House Atlantic is great. Blood Red Summer took me a while to get into because it's super saccharine pop, but man, once it gets its nails into you, you can't help but sing along to it. I know I normally cover much heavier stuff, but I have a special place in my heart for Coheed, and I've seen them live twice, and I listen to a lot more than just metal, and this is definitely among my favorites to listen to outside of the genre, so another easy pick for S tier for me. Alright, Good Apollo, I'm Burning Star 4, Volume 1, From Fear Through the Eyes of Madness in 2005. That is a mouthful, and also you gotta love the weird numbering schemes that definitely got me confused when I first got into them. I felt like I was maybe missing an album or listening to them out of order. Now, even if you're not familiar with a lot of these other tracks I've been mentioning and you're kind of new to the band, even non-fans will likely be familiar with Welcome Home, which is probably their most well-known song thanks to tons of radio play and it being featured on Rock Band. Another fun track to play both in the game and also in real life. What a fucking goated riff in a massive sounding song. And speaking of which, this is where Coheed get really epic with their atmosphere rising to literal symphonic levels at the time. 10 Speed was another pretty popular track along with The Suffering, which is kind of like the catchier You're My Best Friend to Welcome Home's Bohemian Rhapsody. Another probably top 10 track for me overall. The keys on it kind of remind me of Andrew WK, and it has that same uplifting, impossible not to sing along to quality. You could be in the worst mood and you throw that song on and it's at least going to improve it to a degree. Crossing the Frame has lots of great moments, as does Apollo 1, The Writing Writer, and the only downside I would say to this album is it is a little bloated at 15 tracks over an hour and 12 minutes. There are some tracks here I could honestly do without. I would cut completely from the runtime and I think it would be better for it, but even so, it hit number 7 on Billboard and was a huge success, and it's still great. It's a modern classic. I just think it could have been tightened up a little bit, so I'm going to put this one at A tier. Then we have Good Apollo, I'm Burning Star 4, Volume 2, No World for Tomorrow in 2007. Closing out this particular Amory Wars storyline, which also have some comic book adaptations if you really want to dig into the lore, which is pretty deep. There's a whole site I used to go on with forums dedicated to interpreting the lyrics and the stories. And then I also have some personal nostalgia for this one too, because it capped off a big college chapter of my life. I'd also argue that this may be the most metal album with some of these riffs. It's got got the same vocals, but the production and approach to the guitars is very progressive metal on par with like Dream Theater, which tracks since it was actually produced by Rick Rubin and also Nick Raskulinecz, who has worked on everything from Rush to more recently Korn's The Nothing and Code Orange's Underneath. On that note, I do have some loudness wars issues with this one, and the vocal production feels a little bit too poppy, which kind of drags it down a little bit, but I can mostly overlook that due to the amazing songs, which I think actually overall are a little bit more consistent than part one, even if they don't always rise to the same epic level. Excellent title track to kick things off with a big arena anthem to set the tone. The Hound is great with all the little oh-oh-oh-ohs. The Running Free is another more upbeat sounding track, kind of like this album's version of the Suffering Gravemakers and Gunslingers alternatively is nice and heavy with lots of great solos. This one's also a little bit inconsistent, especially in the second half, but it continued to be a success, hit number 6 on Billboard. Me personally, I'm going to put it at B tier, but these top albums, it's so hard. Like, they vary by such small degrees for me. Like, S tier is very clear, but these ones here kind of at the higher mid tiers are the tough ones. And speaking of which, if you're new to the channel, I do try to use every tier and limit myself. In this case, it'll just be 2 per tier. And that I find makes the video a bit more interesting and challenges me more. And so you will see things at like C and D tier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what I'd give them in a review. It just means comparatively within the discography. So moving along, we have Year of the Black Rainbow in 2010. And I was a little skeptical about how this one would be after closing out that massive chapter for the band, but this is another really solid album from them that continues to move up the Billboard chart, this one hitting number 5. The Broken is another great opener with catchy riffs and a lot of power and atmosphere. Guns of Summer is also really good. I like that little tapping riff with the electronics woven through it. We Are Juggernaut made for a solid single with more big anthemic vocals. And as a deeper cut, I really enjoy Far, which is one of their slower, sappier songs, but I can't tell you how many times I've driven home and just belted this thing out on the way. Shattered Symphony is another great track with the neoclassical riffing. World of Lines also really good, but then once more it kind of falls off a little bit after Made Out of Nothing. It lacks some of the nostalgia too of those other albums, but still really good, really solid, and Chris Penny of the Dillinger Escape Plan plays drums on this one too, so big win there. I'm also going to put this one at B tier. All right, then we move into the Afterman series, starting with Ascension in 2012, and then we have Descension in 2013. So I'd say this series has its moments, and when I did my previous video on the discography, I definitely had some people pretty mad at me for my thoughts on them. And I've seen since then, like doing some research and looking around at how other people rank these, that especially Descension, some people put above like some of the original albums, which is a little bit shocking to me because I just feel like overall they're just a little bit inferior. But as always, this is totally subjective, and you can comment again below on why you love these things more than I do. Like, I'm always interested to get that increased insight from different people who are watching on the channel. Now, I will say my impressions of these two have at least flipped because I used to enjoy the Ascension more, but on this most recent re-listen, it wasn't really doing much for me. Key Entity, Extraction 1 and 3, and the Afterman are probably the standouts here, but the rest is pretty meh, and Hollywood is outright lame. Like, I've always kind of hated that song. Every time it comes on, I just sort of wince. And overall, I just find this album to be kind of forgettable. So this one's going to D. Again, I wouldn't give it a D in a review. It's probably more, it's higher than that. But within the discography for me, it's towards the bottom. As for Descension, I enjoyed it a bit more this time, if still not to the same degree as some of my favorites. Number City is pretty funky, had a good time with that one. Gravity's Union has grown on me with some of the riffs calling back to the older material. Away We Go is catchy, and then I still enjoy The Hard Sell, but even none of those like best songs on the album come close to my all-time favorites in the discography overall. So gonna kind of split the difference here, put this one at C tier. Then we have The Color Before the Sun in 2015, which is their only non-concept album, which doesn't really bother me at all since all I cared about at this point was good songs, especially given at the time I was really pretty down on the Afterman albums. And I really did like the lead single, You Got Spirit Kid, which was another just kind of fun, poppy, summer sounding song, almost a pop punk song in a way. And on this most recent revisit, I find myself also enjoying a few others like Island, Eraser, and Atlas, but Unfortunately, the rest of the album I would say is pretty weak. The softer songs just don't really stick with me. It's definitely my least favorite overall in their discography, to the point that I don't have a ton to say about it. Like, not the worst thing you've ever heard by any means, and not something, again, I'd give a D in a standalone review, but within their discography comparatively, I'd say it belongs at the bottom. All right, then we got Vaxis I, The Unheavenly Creatures in 2018. So I was not sure what to expect from this album given my response to the last three. So I went in with pretty low expectations, and I was also pretty nervous about the 1 hour and 20-minute runtime, making it their longest so far. But I started hearing the singles, and I gotta tell you, I was really impressed, and this may be a hot take, but I actually do think that there's less straight up filler on here than the Good Apollo albums. Like, it's impressive, really. Despite the runtime, there's actually no track that I really want to skip on. Like, even the ones that aren't my favorites, I still enjoy a lot. And then the best tracks are absolute bangers. Unheavenly Creatures is a killer single. Love the little synth building into some great riffs on that one. The massive rock and roll guitars alongside the chanted "Haze" and additional strings on The Dark Sentencer are a welcome return to epic space opera territory. Toys is another fantastic single that calls back to their early days, and I've listened to that one like a million times. Like, honestly, that feels like a song that could have been on In Keeping Secrets, and same goes for True Ugly with its pounding drums and buzzing synth bass. More uplifting vibes on The Pavilion, A Long Way Back, which has a very U2 sounding riff, but luckily way better than that.
Say I'm not number 2!
You're not number 2!
That's right, I'm not!
The Gutter is also really solid with the keys and use of ambience before erupting into another rock anthem, and then Old Flames gets me kind of choked up and emotional as I sing along to it. So yeah, again, let me know in the comments if this is surprising, but I'm actually going to put this one at the top of A tier, above the Good Apollo albums. But if you haven't listened to it in a while, I strongly encourage you to, because maybe your opinion will change like mine did on some of my thoughts on those lower albums. And that brings us to Vaxis II, A Window of the Waking Mind in 2022. And so first off, you gotta love that cover. Like, a lot of people made fun of the previous album cover because it looks almost like a screen cap from a video game or something. This one's a little bit more artistic. It looks like a poster for like a hypothetical sci-fi movie starring like Kate Blanchett, Idris Elba, and Rob from vidIQ. Hey, I'd watch it. It definitely at least looks better than that terrible Halo show. Now, like all great sequels, this album picks up right where the last one left off, in that same epic space opera territory, with the big orchestral reprise of Old Flames on the Embers of Fire, leading into the harmonized, very Queen-like guitars on Beautiful Losers. And I wish there was more of this element on the album overall, because those symphonic portions are some of the best that they've ever sounded. And then I was also just delighted to see how well they continue to capture that same uplifting, infectious energy of their early albums with Comatose and The Rocking Shoulders, both of which literally get me dancing if I happen to be standing up. But unfortunately, there's a pretty steep drop-off for a bit after that one. My main criticism is that they take the pop elements to an unfortunate level on this one. Like, they've always been a band that incorporates some poppy elements, but once that electronic beat set in on A Disappearing Act, they started to lose me, and both the songwriting and especially the production feel very Lady Gaga in a weird way. And I actually respect her and her music, but that's just not what I want from Coheed. Same goes for Love, Murder 1, Blood, and especially Bad Man with all the corny auto-tune. Just, this is the first time that, like, when I get to that songs I don't like, I'm like really just disliking them. There are plenty of other songs earlier on in some of those other albums where I'm just kind of like, it's fine, but I'm ready to skip to the next track that I really like. Here I'm just like, I could cut these tracks out, never listen to them again, and I don't think anything of substance would be lost. Now, The Liars Club is a fun track in the second half, and I do like that we get super proggy at the end for the excellent final three, but at that point it almost feels too little too late. It's just this strange clash between these very different styles on the same album, where you've got these like radio pop electronic kind of sounding tracks, and then you've got these like more anthemic rock prog ones, and it sucks because I love the good tracks. I think those are fantastic, but then I also kind of hate the other ones. It's still a welcome addition to their discography overall, a solid rock album too, in a time where I am just absolutely starved for them, but even on that front, I'd actually recommend the new Cave In album over this. So mixed bag, definitely not as good as Vaxis I, but more enjoyable than the Afterman albums, for me anyway. Some people might be mad to hear me say that, but yeah, I'm gonna kind of split the difference again, and this one's going to C tier. Y'all check out this playlist for plenty more metal tier lists, and let me know down in the comments what is your favorite Coheed album and why. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.